Hi everybody, and welcome to this session on paving the path to successful youth entrepreneurship with behavioral science. It would be wonderful if you'd share with us in the chat where you're connecting from and the organization you work for. My name is Roxani Rochas, and I work for UNDP's Regional Hub for the Arab States, specifically in the Regional Innovation Team. And as you probably know, UNDP is hosting this event in the framework of UN Behavioural Science Week. Events are happening throughout this week, so we encourage you to take a look at the agenda, to which I've put the link here on the slide. Our team at UNDP Arab States will also be hosting a second event on Thursday on applying behavioural science to the prevention of violent extremism. And with Nudge Lebanon, we'll be presenting a toolkit we recently launched on the topic. So we hope you'll join us using the registration link I'll pop in the chat a bit later. This year, UN BeSci Week is particularly, UN BeSci Week is particularly special because it's launching a guidance note from the UN Secretary General on behavioral science, as well as an accompanying report featuring experiences from 25 UN entities. And the link to that is also on screen. You can continue engaging in BeSci related goings on at the UN through the UN Behavioural Science group, which is also open to external observers. And you'll find more information about that on the website of the UN Innovation Network and also on Twitter. UNDP itself has been applying behavioral science around the world for quite a number of years now, and in a range of thematics, including waste management, health, and many more. In the Arab States, in addition to PBE and entrepreneurship, it's been applied, among others, to gender-related challenges, public administration, and the COVID-19 response most recently. We have set up this working dashboard on these initiatives that we've been able to identify at least, and there's plenty more in the pipeline. So if you want to know more, do check the link highlighted in yellow here. Now back to the scope of today's event, which we're very happy to be co-hosting with the Behavioural Insights Team, and which is linked to a project we're running throughout this year with BIT. The focus of the project stems from the fact that the Arab states have a very youthful population and have faced some of the highest youth unemployment rates globally for several decades now. One way in which UNDP has been working to address this challenge is by supporting the development of the entrepreneurship ecosystem across the region. So with this project, what we're doing essentially is layering behavioral science on existing entrepreneurship programming and aiming to enhance its effectiveness by taking a deeper dive into the behavioral aspects of different parts of these ecosystems. The project involves 10 UNDP country offices in the Arab states, specifically, as you see here, Djibouti, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Tunisia. With these offices, we've been exploring behavioral barriers and we'll be experimenting with solutions to youth entrepreneurship challenges, and particularly gender-specific challenges, because we do know that women tend to have less access to entrepreneurship trainings, to business-relevant networks, and to mentorship opportunities, and they face a range of gender-related social norms, difficulties accessing finance, gender gaps in unpaid care work that create time and resource limitations, and many other barriers as well. The project isn't restricted to any specific type of entrepreneurship, whether necessity or opportunity entrepreneurship, informal, formal, rural, urban. So the different country offices are working with different kinds of target groups. Since the beginning of the year, we've been working with them to map behaviours and user journeys, to explore barriers and to brainstorm solutions. And in the next phase of work, they'll be getting into prototyping and piloting some of these solutions. We'll then be coming back to identify options for scaling interventions and to share lessons learned. So later in the year, you can be looking out for knowledge products on our findings and the tools we've been using. At the outset of the project, BIT prepared a review of existing evidence on what's been found to work in this area more globally. We've used this evidence to guide our work so far, and we hope to be able to share it with you soon. I'll hand over now to our colleagues at BIT for them to share some of this evidence and the broader methodologies we've been using in the process of designing behavioural interventions in this space. And following their presentation, we'll get into smaller groups for you to hear about the country office's experiences. So please do stay with us for the next hour and a quarter if you can. So I have the pleasure of introducing the following colleagues from BIT. We have with us Monica Wills Silva, who's Principal Advisor and Co-Head of International Development, Senior Advisor Chloe Champeau, and Consulting Advisor Lydia Hayward. So over to you, colleagues, and thanks again to everybody for joining us. Thanks also to the country office colleagues for being with us, and do put any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's a real pleasure to be with you today and to be hosted by the UN for this event. Actually, one of our first collaboration was with UNICEF on improving maternal health back in 2015, I think. And since then, we've worked with UNDP in Eastern Europe, in Moldova, Georgia, Belarus, also with UN Women in Latin America. And it's my great pleasure now to be working with my colleagues from 10 country offices in the Arab states to show you a bit of the work we've been doing. And I think a big part of the conversation, and I hope the takeaway for you today, is to hear from the experiences of UN colleagues or international development colleagues about how they've been applying behavioral science and how that maybe changes from the approach they are normally using. So thanks a lot for having us. If we can go to the next slide, please, Lydia. So first of all, for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with behavioral insights, the BI approach uses evidence of conscious and non-conscious drivers of behavior to address practical issues. So the idea is to draw from different sciences such as neuroscience, anthropology, behavioral economics and psychology to better understand how humans really work and how we can help them to change behavior so it's better for their well-being, and it's always a social impact we're trying to achieve with our project. And we have a very sort of practical and empirical approach to changing behavior. So we want to change behavior and we want to know how much we've changed behavior. So that's why wherever possible, we try to use randomized control trials to measure our approach. And make sure that we are creating better policies, better programs, better interventions. And that's why, yeah, rigorous evaluation is at the core of what we do. And wherever possible, we try and measure the impact we're having. We've been working with government for a very long time. In fact, we were born inside the UK government in 2010. We then spun out as a sort of social purpose company in 2014. So we were able to work not just in the UK, but across the world. We were actually set up with a sunset clause that if we didn't deliver a tenfold return on the cost of the unit in 2 years, we would have to be shut down. Turns out we saved over 20 times our running costs, so we were able to survive and then be able to apply behavioral insights to other policy area and other countries. We've run over 500 trials now across the world, and you can see a map of where we've been working. And I really encourage you to have a look at some of the work we've published, for instance, the East reports that we might talk about later. A key thing in our work is to do capacity building. We think it's very important to empower government entities or international organizations such as the UN so that they are able to integrate this approach in their work. And it has been a real pleasure to be able to do this with colleagues from UNDP in the Arab state, but also in other countries. So you are able to also do this work without us, and you can continue to use this approach in the current program you're doing, but also in future ones. And if we can go to the next slide. So to tell you a bit more about why we think we can make a contribution to this work, we've worked on various different projects such as labor market, work in low and middle income countries, and gender equality. Maybe my colleagues will share some links about the work we've done to give you some example. we changed the way that employers were advertising roles, so they could attract 20% more women to senior roles by advertising vacancies as being part-time or open to job share by default. So that's an example where we try to improve gender equality in organizations. One of our first trial actually was on tuberculosis and increasing adherence to treatment almost twice. So people were twice as likely to take the medication with the behavior change intervention we used. And obviously around labor markets, there are a lot of examples in the report that I have put on the slide, so you can have a look in your own time and see what you think. And if we go to the next slide, please. So one of the key things we did when we worked with the country offices was to do a behavioral map. So I really enjoyed actually this approach because we came together as teams from different countries and we looked at the system of entrepreneurship and all the possible stakeholders that we could target to make a difference. And that was really powerful because we were able to see where is it we can have the biggest difference based on, you know, each country's office existing relationship and leverage with governments. And we were able to map out all the possible behavior we can change. So the behavioral approach really involves breaking down a very complex problem into very small specific behavior that we can target. And I really like the way that Duflo and Banerjee have described this. They are co-winners of the 2019 Nobel Prize. And they said it's possible to make very significant progress against the biggest problem in the world through the accumulation of a set of small steps, each well thought out, carefully tested, and judiciously implemented. And that's really this process we've been doing of breaking down, trying to find some behaviors we can target and seeing if we can make a difference to this specific behavior using behavioral science. And to do this, we've done the behavioral mapping. We've also looked at personas. So thinking about our target population, who is it we want to, whose behavior is it that we want to change, and thinking about who might we be excluding, who do we want to include, which are the entrepreneurs whose behavior we want to change. And I also want to say at this stage that entrepreneurship may not always be the best possible option for someone. It might be that, you know, employment in the public sector or something like this is better for them. So we acknowledge that entrepreneurship is not always a solution, but where it is, we want to make it better. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is why we've been working on this program. And one of the key reasons why we think it's important to address it is that young people and women are overly represented in unemployment. And we think that entrepreneurship can be a tool to help them. And next slide, please. One key lever as well is that we found that with the pandemic, there has been a lot more interest in entrepreneurship, as you can imagine, from having potentially fewer opportunities in the public sector and elsewhere. And so just to give you a bit of an overview of how we've worked, we first look at the evidence and we pay a lot of attention to how academic evidence can help us to make our work better. So we've looked at this in an evidence review that will be published and Lydia, my colleague, will talk about it in a second. And based on that review, we built a bespoke and tailored capacity building program for our colleagues from the Arab states. And the idea of this program and the vision is that they can all create 10 behavioral interventions that they can scale up if they are successful, first pilot them, see if they work, and then scale them up. And we would also love to learn lessons from their work. And our goal is to publish a sort of practical tool that you could all use in a few months' time when it's published to design intervention so that you have the tools in hand to do this. And throughout this workshop, we may talk about some of the tools we've already developed, such as the barrier card that are publicly available for you to use if you wanted to do that. So let's get into the evidence review and give you some ideas of where we're at and how we can change and improve youth and female entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Chloe. Yes, I will take over now and talk you through some of the work that we've done in pulling the existing evidence together. And really the goal of this evidence review was twofold. It was to find out, first of all, what the literature says about the key barriers to and enablers of successful entrepreneurship, particularly among youth and women, and also to review and identify interventions that might work to address these barriers or facilitate some of these enablers. So first of all, thinking about the factors that influence entrepreneurship, we can think about them as occurring at three different levels. So first of all, there might be factors at the individual level, which is individual characteristics or psychological states of an individual. So for example, this could include the knowledge and skills that someone has that enables them to be set up for successful entrepreneurship. We can also see factors occurring at the immediate context surrounding the entrepreneur. So that's things like support from family and friends, having business relevant networks like Roxani talked about, and how that can open up doors for entrepreneurs. And then at an even broader level, we've got sort of the wider context, which includes the broader community, the societal sort of stereotypes that play a role, and the policy environment more broadly that sit in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. So I don't have time to sort of go into the depths of everything we found in our evidence review. Hopefully we'll be able to share all the findings with you soon. But I just wanted to pull out a sort of key example from each of these levels to highlight some of the barriers to successful entrepreneurship and also some of the ways that BI might be able to help improve address some of these barriers. So first of all, at the individual level, there's a few different components that seem to be important for an entrepreneurial mindset that sort of sets people up for success. These are sort of combined, commonly referred to as personal initiative. They are that someone is self-starting. So they take initiative, they're creative with how they pursue opportunities. They're also future thinking, but they sort of plan for the future now in the present. And they're also really persistent at overcoming barriers. And they see challenges as a chance to learn and to grow. Now, we can all have sort of good intentions, but one of the key things from the behavioral sciences that we know is that people don't always follow through on good intentions, that it doesn't always translate into behavior. And this is what we call the intention-action gap. And one reason why for youth and women in particular, the intention-action gap might be larger in the entrepreneurship case is something we call scarcity mindset. And that's this idea that when someone is under stress, when they feel that they have sort of less than they need, they're under this sort of scarcity. So for example, when someone is under financial stress, then it can create this scarcity mindset. And what that does is it makes people kind of tunnel in on that particular challenge. It consumes a lot of their mental bandwidth, and it means that there's less left over to focus on other important tasks like planning for the future and problem solving. So what can we do to address this sort of scarcity mindset challenge? Well, one example I'll show is some work that we did actually with UNDP in Moldova to help Moldovan job seekers, to plan ahead. And the idea is that, being unemployed, searching for a job can be an incredibly stressful experience. How can we help people to actually plan out their job seeking journey and find employment faster? So our intervention involved a sort of toolkit which incorporated a few different components, but it encouraged people to set actionable goals for the future, but also to plan how those goals will be achieved and to be able to review their process and review their progress and get feedback on their goals as they went through. And what we found overall is that our intervention increased the likelihood that an unemployment file would be closed within 5 months. So we helped job seekers to find employment faster. So that's just one example of how helping people to plan for the future can have positive outcomes. Now, if we sort of step beyond the individual level and we think about what's happening in the immediate context of a potential entrepreneur, what we found in our review is that particularly for women, family support is key. Social capital from marriage and wasta, which is the Arabic concept of achieving goals through sort of close connections with influential others, it's associated with entrepreneurial success for women. However, women in the region are often expected to take on more home and family responsibilities, and so can receive less support to undertake their own ventures. So, thinking about how we can sort of boost family support around potential women entrepreneurs. One way we might be able to do this is by addressing what psychologists call pluralistic ignorance, which is when most people sort of act in line with a norm, in line with what other people are doing, despite actually privately rejecting that norm. So in the case of women's entrepreneurship, the majority of men might actually be supportive of their wives pursuing their own business, but they may not act on that because they think that other men around them would disapprove. And there's ways that we can address this pluralistic ignorance. So for example, we found there have been studies in Saudi Arabia, not by us, that showed that young married men were found to actually privately support women's employment outside the home, but they vastly underestimated the support by other men. So when we corrected these misperceptions, men were actually more likely to help their wives search for jobs. And this translated into wives applying for more jobs and also getting more job interviews months later. And we also, BIT actually just released some findings last week, so hot off the press, where we replicated this idea of pluralistic ignorance to encourage fathers to take more parental leave when they had children. And so what we've found is that by communicating to men who are employees of a large UK bank, that telling them that actually the majority of their male colleagues support parental leave for fathers, we boosted their intention to take longer leave by 62%. So this is just highlighting another example across different contexts that correcting those powerful social norms that really powerfully impact behavior can help to address some of these challenges. And finally, stepping back and thinking about the wider context, there's obviously several issues at play here. But one thing that we found was a common challenge was around formal registration for businesses. So formal registration can open up doors for entrepreneurs. It can open up access to different sources of finance, to new services, to new labor and information. But many businesses are not formally registered, and particularly those run by youth and women. And there's many different reasons for that, but one reason seems to be that the registration process is often very costly. So for example, in Syria, the registration fee is equivalent to 56 times the income per capita. So inordinately expensive and out of reach for a lot of people. But not only that, the process itself can be really challenging and unnecessarily so. It can require needing to bring lots of different documents, information together, things that people might not actually have themselves. And so it puts a lot of people off. So when we talk in the breakout room about registration, you can chat a little bit more about some more examples to address this for those who are interested in attending that session. But one example I wanted to share was around how we can change the process and the big impact that can have. So this is an example from a trial, actually one of the biggest RCTs ever conducted in social policy. And it was a trial that we did with Indeed, who are a large job searching website in the UK. And what we wanted to do was to encourage businesses to advertise jobs as flexible by default. So a lot of employers would actually offer flexible working, but they weren't making that clear in job advertisements, even though there was really demand. People wanted to find flexible jobs. So what we did is we changed the process. We designed the process so that when employers were filling out their job advert template, they were prompted with this question about flexible working and to tick those boxes that applied for this specific role. And then those options were included when people were searching for the job ad, they could see the flexible options that were at play. What we found is that changing this process and redesigning it, we increased the number of ads that were advertised as flexible by 20%. There were almost 20 million job applications that passed through this trial, so a huge trial, and we increased the number of ads advertised as flexible by 20%. And also those jobs that were advertised as flexible actually saw a 30% increase in the number of applicants. So what you can see is that there is this real demand that employers can attract more candidates for their role by being transparent about the flexible options that they had and meeting that consumer demand. So this is just sort of one example of how changing the process can really help to address some of these more wider contextual issues. So that was a real just sort of taster from the evidence review, just to get you excited about some of the different ways that BI might be able to play a role in helping to promote youth and women's entrepreneurship. But I'll hand back to Chloe now, who's going to chat a little bit about where the country offices are at, and then we can jump into our breakout rooms and you can hear from them themselves.
Thank you, Lydia. So what we would love to show you now is how colleagues have been doing this in practice on the ground. So we have created 3 breakout rooms. You will remember maybe some of the behaviors I've mentioned just earlier. So have a think about which behaviors you'd be most interested to hear more about, and from which colleagues you'd like to hear from, and we will go into breakout rooms to discuss this in a few minutes. One thing I wanted to do before that is show you a bit how we've worked with our colleagues from the country offices. So one thing we often do when we do capacity building programs, which by the way can last one day or 1 week, or they can last years depending on the demand, is that we try and teach our colleagues the methodology that we use to design behavioral insights intervention, and then measure them to know what the impact has been. And this is what we've done with our colleagues from the Arab states. So we went through a first phase of targeting the problem, and this was sometimes quite painful to have to take a big problem such as entrepreneurship and break it down into a specific, observable, measurable behavior that we can possibly change. Then going into the ground, into the field through the explore phase to try and talk to people, experience the process. And those of you who are familiar with design thinking will know how we've, like the process of doing a user journey, trying to understand what steps in the process are friction, what steps can be changed, and deciding where to focus. And finally, designing the solution, which is the stage we are at now. And then piloting the intervention and/or doing a randomized control trial if that is possible before scaling it up. So we know that when we scale up, we know that the intervention has been successful and we can measure that change. So I just wanted to give you a few ideas of potential intervention that our country offices have been thinking about. One of them is around information provision, which you will know as raising awareness about something. The other is about environmental design. So that's changing the environment in which people make decisions, either a virtual environment or a physical environment. So for instance, the process of physically registering, how you get into the building, what happens when you go into the building, what documents you have to show, etc. The process design is, for instance, switching a process which is physical, such as registering in person to registering online, or making the process of using mobile money easier by changing the kind of documents you would have to show, for instance, to be able to register. Changing the incentives, and that can be financial incentives. So, for instance, incentivizing people to use mobile money by giving them a small sort of a small amount of money they could use on the app, but it could also be non-financial incentive, and those can be extremely powerful as well. But it can also be changing systemic rules and regulation, and I think that's when it's so fascinating to work with agencies such as yours, is when you have really good relationship with ministries, and what we can do is not just do some sort of smaller intervention, but actually change the structure as well, and the way that the regulation is put in place, potentially also changing legislation and using behavioral insights to do this even better and make sure that once the legislation is in place, it's better implemented. So that can also be very powerful. So now I would like to invite my colleagues to join us for the breakout rooms. And one of the first questions I'll be asking them is, how is the behavioral insights approach different to what they've been using? So in room 1, we'll talk about access to finance with my colleagues from Lebanon, Morocco, Djibouti, and Tunisia. In room 2, we'll speak about business registration and formalizing one's business and what are the challenges of doing this with colleagues from Somalia, Jordan, and Sudan. And finally, in room 3, we'll talk about access to training, access to incubator program, how do we encourage people to go onto the program, make sure the program is very good and efficient and evidence-based, and encourage people to keep attending it and following through with it at the end. So you will be assigned to a breakout room by default, but if you don't want to join that breakout room, you can get out of it and join another one. So just come back to the main room, and I think, Roxane, you'll be able to assign them to another room. So let's continue the discussion with our colleagues.
Thanks very much, Chloe. Yes, just before going into breakout rooms, I wanted to remind you about the event we're hosting on Thursday as well on behavioural insights for preventing violent extremism. So I'm putting the registration link for that in the chat again, and also putting in my email address. So please feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions or want to exchange experiences or know more about the project. So we'll be opening the breakout rooms right
Roxane,
now. Yes.
I was just wondering, maybe we can keep 5 minutes for question. I saw a question before.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I completely forgot that we did say we would have some time.
And I'm removing my, sorry, can you hear me? I'm removing my headphones because I'm told my audio isn't great. Thanks, Alisa. So yes, maybe let's make time for a couple questions if anybody has any immediate ones. There was a person asking for more information about the Moldova example that you shared and the tools that you used there.
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about that.
By email.
So for the Moldovan example, what we were trying to do is before they asked the Moldovan job seekers what they had done in the previous week. And I think the idea of this new program was to help the job seeker think about what are they going to do in the next few weeks. So focusing more on the future rather than the past, and encouraging them to think about how they're going to do this and how they're going to structure their week around job seeking. So for instance, thinking about on Monday, what are they going to do? I will reach out to 2 employers who work in that field, and I will contact them and send them my CV. So we were really encouraging them to be very precise in their goals and encouraging them to do goal setting and being future orientated, I would say, rather than looking at the past. And we've actually used a very similar approach in France, where we are helping young people who are unemployed and jobless and who don't have much education to continue to come to the job center, because a lot of them come once and don't come back again. So we've developed an app to help them break down the big goal of finding a job into very small steps that are achievable and help them know how they're going to get to success, doing it one activity at a time.
Thank you. Did anybody else have any questions? Please feel free to unmute as well. And sorry, I've had to go back to the noisy headphones because I couldn't hear anything. Okay, if there's no immediate questions then, and there'll be space for discussion in the breakout rooms as well, we'll be moving into the rooms now, and you've been automatically allocated to a room. I'll be opening them in a second, but you will have the option to change to a different room yourself if you have a specific interest in one of the thematics or a particular country. So I'm opening them now, and thank you so much again for joining, and hope you'll find the experiences from the country offices useful and